Hello everyone, I'm Stephen W. Long, this is The Writing Life, and I have to say I'm so pleased today to have Joe Wilkins as our guest. Joe's been on, what, three times or something?
Yeah, I think so.
And maybe this, because I met you like this, but I think lots of people think of you as maybe first a poet, maybe a memoirist. We're going to talk about your debut novel.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to get into this. This is so terrific.
Great.
So
great.
number one, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Yeah.
All right. Just to get this out of the way,
Yeah.
how did you come up with the title? Where's that from?
That's a great question. I was working on this novel and had a very different title, a very different working title.
Okay.
And I liked it quite a bit. And when I started working with my editor, Little Brown, on it, he said, "We're going to have to do something about the title." And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, it sounds too much like a book of poems." So maybe that goes back to your introduction.
Okay.
As coming from the world of poetry, I think I was in this lyric space, and he was looking for something a little different. And so he said, "How about you spend a weekend with a book and send me 8 or 10 possibilities?"
Okay. All right.
And so I did, and as I was doing that, I quickly, the title that became the title of the book, Fall Back Down When I Die, that was maybe the fourth or fifth one I sort of thought of, ran across, and it's a line from the book. And I thought, oh, that's a good one. I like that one.
Okay.
I hope he likes that one.
Right.
And he did, so.
Yeah. You know, before we started filming, you and I were talking about kind of the state of publishing and so on.
Yeah.
And just, I think most people don't know this, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the author in a traditionally published book has an influence on the title, as they do with the cover, but they don't get to pick.
No, not at all. It really is, in a lot of ways, we think of writing as a solitary thing.
Right.
But it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration between you and your influences. It's a collaboration between you and the people in your life who help you with your writing.
Right.
And then at the publishing level, it's a collaboration between you and your editor.
Right.
And the other folks who are attached to that, the designers and other really smart people helping you bring the book into the world, for sure.
Sure. Well, good. You talked about the title being somewhat lyrical.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is, it's a great segue, and it's not at all pandering because you're in the studio here. I read in bed at night, and I opened your book and I read it, and I got through with the first page, and I told my wife, I said, Joe's a poet. I mean, it's just, you're a poet when you do poetry, but you're a poet when you do prose too.
Yeah.
Very lyrical, I think, the prose is.
Good.
And I have to say, you know what it reminded me of? The first page of Cold Mountain.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And
I'm so pleased.
When I opened that book, as well as yours, I thought, this is why I read.
Yeah.
I want to spend some time here.
Yeah.
So
That's great to hear. I think when we think about long-form fiction, when we think about the novel, we're often thinking about plot. We're thinking about characters we want to spend time with.
Right.
But the reality is that those characters, this amazing story, it's all built out of the 26 letters of the alphabet and a few pieces of punctuation. And so the language is what's allowing all this. And for me, paying attention to that language does allow a deeper engagement with character. It allows me to figure out where we might be going, where these characters might be taking us.
Really? Okay.
And it's through that attention to the language often that occurs. So.
You know, I wasn't going to touch on this. I hadn't thought about it, but you just brought it up, punctuation. Your punctuation's a little different.
Yeah. So there's sections in here that are, the conceit is that they're written as a journal.
Okay.
From this man who's done something he can't take back. He's on the run in the Bull Mountains of Montana.
This is Verl.
Yes,
I
Verl.
want to talk to you about that too.
And Verl is wise, but also very flawed, and his writing style is particular, and I wanted to capture some kind of particularity.
Okay.
And so I sort of set myself some rules about how he might make words on the page. His voice, his oral, the voice that he uses was a voice that was very familiar to me from my grandfather, from men I grew up around. But thinking then, how would they put something on the page? What would that look like? And so I had to consider what that would entail.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually kind of want to come back to that.
Yeah.
But when I was talking about punctuation, I meant use of quotes.
Oh, yeah,
quotation marks.
yeah.
So That was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sure, sure. Well, that's something I think I kind of took from Kent Harif,
Oh boy.
the author of Plain Song, beautiful novel.
Sure.
Oh, I just love it. Such an influence on me as a writer, such an influence on this book. And he doesn't use any punctuation. And I heard him speak once about that, and his argument is that the human voice is so privileged with punctuation, or with the quotation marks. And he wanted it to be sort of part of the narrative frame itself. And especially in a book about the West, where silence matters as much as what is spoken, where
Okay.
what is unsaid between people matters as much. I thought maybe I'll try something similar, and the more I tried it, the more I liked it.
That's wonderful. I hadn't thought
Yeah.
of Kent Harif. I was thinking of Cormac McCarthy.
Yes, yeah, and I think he's someone who does something similar. Absolutely, absolutely.
I think, as an example, All the Pretty Horses.
Yeah, yeah.
When I read that, I thought, this is a guy who is so self-assured. He's just, it's like at the very beginning, and I've heard that in a novel
Yeah.
or whatever, in the opening of the book, the author makes a pact with the reader.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
the pact is, I'm not going to do anything to dispel this dream. I'm skilled enough that I'm going to take you
Yeah.
along with me,
Yeah.
and we're not going to break that up. Well, I think Cormac McCarthy, in addition to that, says, I'm going. And,
Keep
and,
up.
Yeah, and try to keep up.
Yes, absolutely. There's a way in which I remember reading Cormac McCarthy for the first time and feeling, it almost felt like I was reading another language. But I could understand it, I could
Right.
make sense of it, but it just felt so rich and new and
bet.
textured. It felt like it was being made on the page in a new way.
Oh, I
you
love
know?
that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
someone I admire a lot.
Well, and again, I think that you've done that as well. You really have a voice.
Oh, good.
Because when I read your nonfiction and so on,
Yeah.
I can hear this voice. And I don't think
good.
it's not
Yeah.
your conversational voice, but maybe it's style. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
using the wrong
yeah,
word.
Yeah, I think those are so intertwined.
Yeah.
The way we put words on the page, the way we pay attention to sound, the sentences we favor or disfavor.
Right.
All those things go into that, and then too, of course, voice is what we talk about, right? So it's
Okay.
it's what we're paying attention to and what we notice, and so I'm glad to hear that is that's in the fiction and the nonfiction and across those genres.
Absolutely.
Good.
The structure of the book, I mean, so this is a show about writing, and this
Yeah.
is the kind of thing that
Yeah.
I'm really interested in. The structure is shifting third person, past tense, except for Virl.
Yeah.
Can you, and you talked about it a little
Yeah.
bit, but
Right. Virl was the first voice that came to me.
okay.
He's the voice that sort of began this entire story. And his character is someone I feel like I've known all my life.
I wondered.
And he sort of insinuated himself in my mind after many readings of Eudora Welty's story, Where is the Voice Coming From?
Okay.
Which is written in the voice of the murderer of the civil rights leader Medgar Evers. And Eudora Welty was a Mississippian, as was Medgar Evers. She's living in New York City when she hears about his murder. She's a white woman. And her first thought is, when she hears that he's been murdered, I know who did it. Not that she knew specifically, but she knew what kind of person might have done it, because in her own words, they were my people. And so to a certain extent, the story is her taking those people, herself to task. And thinking about that and thinking about the struggles of the American West, Virl came to me. And someone who is my people, someone who I know intimately and deeply, who I deeply also disagree with, but whose voice I know. And I thought, I'm going to listen. I'm going to see where he goes,
Yeah.
see what happens.
You're very much anticipating what I.
Oh, great.
And no, this is just great.
Good.
Because your background, as I understand it, is from Montana.
Yeah.
I think we have a preconception of the people in the area.
Yeah.
I think a couple of things. I think maybe you don't fit that preconception as an individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got out.
Yeah.
And that's not to say, oh, it's awful.
Yeah,
You would
right.
want to escape, but you just strike me as a different kind of
Yeah.
person than we're thinking about.
Yeah, and I think, yes, I think that's true. I do think that a lot of my life was oriented towards the written word. I started reading at a very young age, and even though I didn't want to be a writer at a young age. I didn't know that was something you could want to
Right,
be.
right.
I wanted to learn. I loved school, and I knew I
Yeah.
wanted to go to college. It was just something that not many people in my community did.
Right.
But
Joe,
I do.
was that hard? Was it hard to be
yeah.
different?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it is. It presented its struggles, but there was also, I think, the other thing I was thinking about was there are so many differences, so much texture in rural America, and I think that that we see blue states and red states, and we think it's all this way and it's all that way, and considering my own grandparents, who were some of the kindest, most honorable people I know, who I think voted Republican their entire life, and who had some very libertarian views at times, but they were complicated people, and they were textured, and to sit down and talk with them would be to take a journey and not to just know right away, right? And so that's that was something I was trying to get at in the book, and that's something I feel about the state of Montana, my home place, that small town I grew up in, that it is complicated and textured and not simple and not simply red.
Yeah. You very much did that.
Oh, good.
And in fact,
Good.
again, we're on the same wavelength there. Your characters, I think, really represent such a spectrum. And I'm thinking about Jillian as an example of somebody who doesn't kind of fit that mold.
Yeah.
She gets to say some things. In fact, I wrote this down. She talks about the grandfathers, the great-grandfathers and the grandfathers and then the fathers. And she said that they are the people who caused the Dust Bowl, poisoned the waters, and nearly decimated some of the wildlife.
Yeah.
And so that's not a view of, it's not a view that would be ascribed to this stereotype.
Yeah.
Because she's not.
No, not at all. And I think, there's a lot of me in her character.
I would think.
There's a lot of my mother, who was a...
You got a chance to comment on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
This.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot of my mother, who was a school teacher who gave so much to the community she lived in and to the children she worked hard for. But there's also other people in her, and I'm thinking of a number of years ago now. I was headed back to Montana, and I was writing about wild bison and some of the struggles that are surrounding their presence as they leave Yellowstone Park.
Okay.
And I sat down with an old rancher, who's, let's see now if I think his father was a great friend of my grandfather's, and they'd been there a long time, this family. Right. And we were talking about ranching and about ideas of land ownership and landscape and wild things on the land. And he, at one point, sort of got this faraway look on his eyes, and he said, my son's not coming back. I don't know what will happen to this land. Maybe I just ought to pull the fences up and let the buffalo have it back. And there's this sense, I think, for him, it was a bit of a moment of reckoning. And that's maybe not exactly the right answer. Maybe there's a way we can live sustainably on that landscape.
Together.
But that idea, though she gets to say it in this, she's hot, she's angry,
right.
But that idea is extant, I think, and it took me a while growing up there to start to understand. I had this very rosy vision of American settlement and the homesteading days, and it was, for the most part, a failure, a great failure, and we're still dealing with the ramifications of that here in the West.
Yeah.
And I slowly learned that, as do many people in rural areas.
And Joe, part of that, I think you're saying, is economic.
Economic.
Is that
ecological.
And then environmentally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you were talking, not to be too political here, but I was thinking of the Bundys.
Yes.
Is there kind of a mindset that?
Absolutely. Thinking about, back to Eudora Welty, every time I saw Ammon Bundy on television over the occupation, I remember thinking, I know him.
Sure.
We could sit down and have a beer together.
Right.
He reminded me so deeply of young men I grew up with, of men I knew. I disagree with almost everything he stands for.
Right.
But I felt like I knew him. And I also had a really strong reaction to some of the ways he and his family were treated in the wider media, and especially on social media.
Okay.
It felt so dismissive. It felt so, not that I agree with anything, but they were derided as cartoons in a way that I thought, oh, they're not that. That's one thing they aren't.
Right.
They're dead wrong.
Boy, that's an important
but
point.
they're not that.
Yeah. Would you be motivated to take up an essay or something in that regard?
Yeah, I've written on that some, and I think there's some writing on that in the memoir, though of course the memoir is not as outward looking and much more inward looking.
Right.
And I have written other essays that are looking out. In a lot of ways, though, I think I'm just enamored of fiction now and exploring those ideas in fiction.
Oh, I'm glad.
So
Yeah. Again, I've known you
Yeah.
a while and read your other work and just loved it. But I didn't know that you had an affinity for fiction.
Yeah,
And I'm just glad that you're pursuing that.
Good.
You started with Verl.
Yep.
You said he
Yep.
was the first character. I was thinking about Rowdy.
Yeah.
And this, take this in the nicest way.
Yeah.
Did he, and 'cause I don't know what word to use other than this, and I don't mean it disparagingly. Is Rowdy a device?
In some ways, yes. He's what centers and then begins.
I said he was the glue.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he allows things to start to happen. Much of Wendell's story would be predictable. His story is a sad story, but it would be far more predictable, and it wouldn't allow him to become who he needed to be.
Right.
But Rowdy steps into his life, and now he has to take care of this young boy, and that allows him to become who he could be.
Yeah.
In a way.
And when I said a device, it was just, and I'm sure you know the saying, an author needs to get his characters up a tree and then throw rocks at them.
Yes. Yeah.
And you've done that.
Good.
Big old rocks.
Yeah.
With Rowdy, who maybe we'll have a chance to kind of summarize this, but he's a young boy, 7, is that right? And his parents have passed away.
Well, his mother has been incarcerated.
That's right. Yeah.
And he was abandoned by her to a certain extent before that.
Right.
For long stretches of time, she's an addict.
Yeah.
And his mother is Wendell's cousin, and so Wendell becomes sort of the only relative that the family services can find.
But you know what I thought was so endearing is that, and I think to a great extent this defines Wendell, is that he just plain steps up. That's a big responsibility, and I don't see him shying away in any sense.
Yeah. He tries. I mean, he makes mistakes. But he's trying, and of course he's ill-equipped, but he's trying.
Right.
And he does. I think that's a good way to say it. He does step up, and his character as well. I talked about Verl sort of coming to me as this amalgam of so many voices I'd heard and people I'd known. Wendell too is that. He's
friends maybe.
So many young men I knew, so many men I knew who were able to step up, who could do great things, who wouldn't shirk what was cast upon them.
Yeah.
And that's an admirable quality.
Locally here, my wife's involved in the lavender industry.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes they'll have young people come help.
Yeah.
And the young people who have grown up on a farm are just different. and different in a good way.
Yeah.
And the accepting responsibility, seeing the job through, not quitting.
Yeah.
And I think that's admirable.
Yeah. There's, to a certain extent, I think, and I've written about this again some before, but one of the things that growing up in rural places teaches us is it gives us intimacy with the real stuff of life.
Absolutely.
And it's not that you can't have that intimacy living in other spaces, it's just harder. You have to go seek it out. It can be very easy to insulate oneself, to step away from what is real, to spend our lives air-conditioned and taking food out of packages.
And even beyond that, and I pretty much grew up in Southern California, but having come from Iowa, so culturally or topographically, it was very different. And I wondered even then, for a teenager growing up in Watts, which is all asphalt and tall buildings and glass and steel, what does that do to your soul?
Yeah,
Not even a judgment, not good or bad,
Yeah.
but it must shape you as I think you were
Yeah.
shaped by
Oh, absolutely.
your environment.
Absolutely. It's I'm 41 years old now, and I spent the first 19 years of my life in eastern Montana.
Okay.
It's longer than I've ever lived anywhere.
Sure.
Second now is here in Oregon, which I'm very pleased to be here. But Montana is still the primal landscape. It's the landscape I see when I close my eyes, when I dream. That great wide sky and long unraveling plains and badlands are sort of really close to the bone. And that'll be with me forever.
Sure. I think there's something about home as defined by maybe that early nurturing place.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know for a long time I said, I'm going home to Iowa. Well, I mean, I hadn't been there for most of my life, but that was still home.
Still home, right.
Yeah. Let me ask you about something else.
Sure.
It seems to me that in maybe all of your writing, but at least what comes to mind, family is so central.
Yeah.
Talk about, I mean,
Sure.
have I got that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Family is how we make it through. I listened to Krista Tippett's On Being podcast.
Oh, sure.
And she's had a couple of times now this wonderful Irish poet, and I'm going to not say his name correctly, Padraig O'Tuama, I believe, if I've got it close. And he was talking about this old Irish saying, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the Irish of it, but it roughly translates to, "You are where I stand when my feet are tired."
Oh, okay.
And that sense that family matters so much, and that the breaking of a family is a grave and disastrous thing.
Yeah.
And when I was 9, my father died, and it nearly broke my family. It didn't, but it nearly did. And so both family and its breaking are close to me, are things I'm paying attention to. And of course, as a teacher, first a high school teacher, now a college educator, I get to know these young people, and through them I get to know so many families. And hear their stories, and it seems to me one of the things we might rely on in this life is family, the natural world, family. Hopefully good water. These things are just things that places we can go when our feet are tired.
Right. And I guess this is pertinent.
Yeah.
I think that there are times that we take things out on family because there's a sense that they'll be there. There's a sense that they'll take it and take us back anyway.
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe they don't deserve it,
Yeah.
but it's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we show our families our worst side of ourselves.
Sure.
And of course, as a writer, then I'm trying to think about my own worst self and trying to reckon with that. And so that's something I'm paying attention to and trying to work through on the page often.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
good. Tell me about your students.
Yeah. Oh, they're great. I have amazing students at Linfield. They are earnest and willing and super sharp. They come from so many different backgrounds.
Okay.
My poetry writing class this semester was, I had non-traditionally aged students in there. I had first-year students in there.
Now back up a little bit.
Yeah.
That means old people or what?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I had first-year students in there, 18 years old. I had students who are biology majors and students who came in and said, "I want to be a poet," right from the beginning. And they all wrote wonderfully, and they were really quite a community together. They did such a great job. Yeah.
That's a great age.
One of my students wrote in her reflection, she said, "This class has been life-changing and life-saving." And I thought, oh, what a lovely turn of phrase.
That's a keeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, you were not an English major.
No.
You're a computer guy.
Yeah, I have a computer engineering degree from undergrad.
Yeah.
And I think maybe one of the struggles with my rural background, to loop back around to what rural America teaches us, is it did teach me that you just keep at it. You just persist. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I learned that lesson so well, I thought it would be failure to switch majors or to do something else. I thought I'd chosen something, and you just stick with it. And so I knew fairly soon, sophomore, junior year, that I didn't like what I was doing. I wasn't interested in it. What I did really like was when I had the rare chance to take a history class or a literature class. And it wasn't until I ended up going 5 years in undergrad, and it wasn't until that 5th year when my load was much lessened that I was able to take a creative writing class and fell in love right away.
I'm going to maybe pronounce this wrong, but you went to Gonzaga?
Yep. Yep. I
Which
was at Gonzaga.
is that, where is that?
Spokane, Washington.
Spokane.
Yeah. And at the time, it sort of exploded with the men's basketball team doing so well, and the women's too. They were amazing this year. But at the time, it was a small college, a little bit bigger than Linfield, but not that much bigger.
Okay.
So it was a good place to be.
But then so you're a computer guy.
I taught high school math
Okay.
for a couple years, and then went back to grad school for creative writing, wanting to give it a shot. Also thinking that with this degree, I would be able to get my English endorsement on my teaching certificate and teach high school English. And that was in the back of my mind. But then as sort of way led on to way, I applied for higher ed jobs and was lucky enough to get one, and then eventually ended up here at Linfield. So.
And I've forgotten now, were you in the East?
I was in the Midwest, in Iowa, actually.
Oh,
so
okay.
yeah, taught there for 6 years. Good place to be. We wanted to be back west. My wife's from Vancouver, Washington.
Okay.
And so when the Linfield job came up, we were very excited.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm sure glad you're here. I told Caroline, I think you're a treasure for the area. It's just wonderful.
Good.
Yeah. I was thinking that too, do you feel there's any comparison with Wallace Stegner? I was kind of thinking, no, but I mean,
so, yeah.
well, yeah, don't we all?
Yeah.
But I mean, the locale and
Yeah. I think he's been so influential on Western writers, and I wouldn't say that I've read many of his books and I admire them deeply. Actually, especially his nonfiction. I love his nonfiction. I wouldn't go to him as a writer who say I emulate necessarily, but I think his influence has been so important on other writers who are even closer to me in some ways, like William Kittredge and James Galvin and others, Louise Erdrich perhaps. But he is definitely an influence, kind of a through the generations influence.
Yeah. This is just gossipy, but I think Angle of Repose.
Yeah.
Didn't he kind of borrow that from somebody else? Or?
I don't. Yes, I've heard something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember though. I don't know the whole story.
But we're going to give him a pass, I guess. No, but he was it at Stanford that he taught?
He taught for many years there.
I think McMurtry.
Oh yes, McMurtry
and Ken Kesey. Can you imagine being in that class?
Oh gosh, yeah. Wow, what a gathering.
Yeah, that was something. Well, thank you so much for coming by. And folks, I got to tell you, just go out and get the book. It's just so terrific. Can I say that?
Yes, please do.
This is, what is this? Not, what do we call this broadcast?
Public access?
Public access, yeah. We're not supposed to be, say commercial type things.
Okay.
Let's rephrase that. This is a good book. But anyway, thank you so much, and congratulations. I was so taken, and for a debut novel, it's just wonderful.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Stephen. It's lovely to be here.
All right. Folks, that's it. We'll see you next time on The Writing Life. Visit me at stephenwlong.com. You can contact me with suggestions or whatever comes up, and we'll just see you next time. Thanks so much. Thanks.
What do you think? We done?
I don't know. You guys want to do one just with yourself without me doing the
think we're done. If
No,
they got
no.
enough. They got enough.
They got enough? Probably. Okay, sounds good.
Let's go lunch. I'm
Oh.
hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can just bite too.